Hello and welcome. My name is Susanna Simmons and I'm the founder of Productive IT. And today I'm joined by Terry Pearce, who's the founder of Untoldplay and also one half of the Training Design podcast. Hi Terry, thanks for joining me today.
Hi Susanna, pleased to be here.
Yeah. So today we're talking about gamification, Terry. And so how did you get into gamification and what is gamification?
So yeah, I think it's really nice to link those two questions together actually, because I kind of discovered a little bit as I was going along what gamification was. I've been in L&D for 20 years, first of all working in a hospital and in the telecoms industry kind of as an internal trainer and then training manager. And then for the last 15 years as a consultant. And over that time, I more and more found myself gravitating towards the design side of training. So doing a lot of training design and started to get some really good results from that. And then started to specialize in that and market myself as a bespoke training designer. And what I found, I think, was that while I was doing all of that, maybe partly because I'm a lifetime kind of gamer, I love games. I've been playing them since I was, as small as I can remember. I found myself working games and game type elements into my training design, into the learning that I was designing, and found it really effective, found it worked really well, and I enjoyed doing it. And then I kind of, as I was doing that, I came across this term gamification and read a lot of the kind of literature around it, some of the kind of experts like Yukai Chow or Jane McGonigal and some of those people, and found that actually there's a lot of kind of science and research behind why it kind of works. And I just really found that it's, I guess you could say, my calling kind of thing. So that's kind of, I guess, a little part of history of how I got into it. But I think that really helped me to understand what it is and what it isn't, because I do think that a lot of people have a kind of idea of gamification, maybe because it became a bit of a buzzword a few years ago. If you went to kind of the CIPD show or all those kind of things, it's like, oh, gamification, we've got to get it into your learning. And I think what a lot of those companies that were marketing gamification showed it as, and what people saw it as, was, little men on a screen running about, just as a kind of quite shallow overlay over some kind of learning point. And actually, I think gamification is much more than that, much deeper, but also kind of simpler, in that it's anything where you take something that works within a game and you say, could that work somewhere outside of a game? So a really subtle example that I like to use is the LinkedIn progress bar. So if you look at that and you say, well, what's that got to do with games? But it's an idea that works in games and it brings people back to games. You've completed 70% of your quest within some kind of game, translates to, okay, you've got this progress bar, and people look at it and there's a human drive, a human motivation to want to get that 70 to 100. And so LinkedIn use that one technique in a way that most people probably never even thought, oh, I'm being gamified or anything like that. And it massively paid off for them in terms of people engaging with the site in the way that LinkedIn wanted.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, I think from my personal experience and before sort of meeting you and talking to you about gamification, I think for me it was quite often I felt like it was, from a training point of view, it was, you had to use some kind of board game or something within the training environment, or it was much more, the whole thing was kind of a game, rather than, like you say, it's taking elements of what works in the gaming world and applying that into a different context, which is, training design, training delivery, and so on. So brilliant. Thank you. Right. So what are the benefits of gamification? So as you know, I work with software companies on their customer education programs. So, in that sort of context, what could be the benefit of using the gamification principles?
Well, I think, if you build on that definition and you start to say there are all these elements, techniques, ideas that work in games, and what we mean by work is they motivate people to do things. They motivate people to come back to the game, to play it in the first place, to come back to it, to keep coming back to it, to take the next action that the game designer wants them to take. And so if that's what these ideas and techniques are doing within games, they can do exactly the same outside of games. They can motivate whoever your target is, whether it's a user of a system, whether it's a learner, anybody, to take a particular action if you choose the right technique and you do it in the right way. It's really all about motivation, and a lot of things connected with motivation, like cognitive ease, just making things easy, so that if you've got a range of things that somebody might do on a screen, it's about making it easy for them to make the choice that's most beneficial to them, or within a training session. So it's a lot of things around motivation. It's tapping into as well the way that a lot of people are designing learning, and also kind of computer interfaces, UX now. People are designing it in tune with the idea that lots of people play games and they're familiar with games, and the more that the kind of current generation becomes removed from us, the more you've got there's this term digital natives, and people just being used to the idea of being presented things in a game type way.
Yeah. So I suppose if I think of an example of a software company that I know of that uses, they've got sort of an online academy, and they have things like point systems and so on to get people to complete different modules and so on. So presumably that's using elements of gamification, because it's like you say, it's that motivation to go and complete the next step, and to encourage people to complete the full training program, which means they've learned about all the features and so on, to then hopefully be successful with the product.
Yeah, it is definitely. And one of the first few techniques that people start to think about when they start to think about gamification is points and perhaps leaderboards and badges. They're kind of quite often connected, and they can be really, really effective gamification tools, whether you're talking about people using a system, or whether you're talking about learning or anything else. But because they're perhaps the easiest tools to reach for, I think they're often kind of misused. I think sometimes people say, right, if we give points to something, that'll motivate people to do something, but only if, and it can definitely, but only if the points are meaningful to the person. Again, if you think of games, if you play any kind of computer game, you probably had some kind of game where you've looked at the points up in the corner and they mean nothing to you. You've got 43,000 points. Is that good? I don't know. But if you've got something where the points mean something, perhaps you compare it to other people, perhaps you've got a real sense of a goal that you want to get to within your points, that can be really effective.
And that links quite nicely. So one of the sort of pillars I've got in my 7 pillars model is about understanding your users, and part of that is sort of their motivation, isn't it? And different people are motivated by different things. So like you say, the points system and the badges won't mean anything to some people. They won't be bothered, and so that won't have the outcome that people want. So with that, how have you got some suggestions or some tips of how those principles could be applied to kind of meet those different motivations and so on? What could software companies with their customer education programs, what kind of things could they be considering doing?
Yeah, well, I think the first important thing is to be thinking about not just diving into the game mechanics or game elements or game techniques like points or whatever you might be talking about. The first thing is to start, and this comes through loud and clear, I think, in your 7 pillars as well, is to start with what do you want users to actually do, or what do you want customers to do, and and who are they? Where are they coming from right at the moment? And it's trying to look at the gap, or the kind of the relationship between those two things. So being really clear on the desired action, what do you want people to do, and who are the people, and where are they coming from? And once you start to look at that a little bit more deeply, then you can start to think about not just the techniques or mechanics you're going to use or how you're going to use them, but you can think about their journey, their experience, which is a huge part of games. You look at somebody playing a game, and if they're an expert, if they're in full swing in the game, then it looks really impressive. They're doing all these things, but actually they had a journey to get there, and the early stages of that journey looked less impressive. So yeah, I think comparing those two things, looking at the journey, and only then starting to look as broadly as possible, I think, at all of the different options of things you could do. So there are lots and lots of lists out there of game mechanics, game techniques, and I think it's really, really good to start using those as kind of brain food, really, to start to give yourself some chance of inspiration, or look around at games that you play or that you enjoy or that you've seen other people use effectively, and just start to think, is there different ways that I could use those techniques. I mean, what I might do, if it's okay, is just if I can share a screen with you a second, I can show you a really good list of techniques that I often reference. It's not mine, but it's created by a gamification expert that I'm really keen on, the work of Andrzej Marziewski. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
So this is Gamifieduk, which is a website created by Andrzej Marziewski, and he has done a lot of different ways of trying to help people get inspired about how to gamify different things. But one of the really useful ones that I find is this list that he's got of game techniques, or game elements, game mechanics. So these are all, if you kind of look at these, just individual little things that you can pick out of some games that work really effectively, like signposting, you know, pointing you in the next direction, or loss of it, giving you something that you know, that you don't want to lose, or, you know, feedback and progress. Or if I just scroll down a bit more, you know, time pressure, or consequences of actions and choices, or, you know, and you start to see some of these links in a little bit to what you were talking about around different users having different preferences. So he's kind of talked about some different player types, which I won't go into too much now, but he's kind of grouped these techniques under what kind of ones appeal to which different kinds of user or player. If you start to look at some of these, they're really quite simple in their own right. They can be part of a very complex game, but actually, you know, just like the LinkedIn progress bar, if we take them away from a game and apply them to something, then somebody might not be feeling they're in a game. If they don't like games particularly, or they don't feel that games are professional, that doesn't matter, because all we're doing is saying, hey, look, let's give them, for example, let's take this, some unlockable content. Let's put it there so they can see it, but it's locked and they have to do something to achieve something to actually unlock it so they can use it. And that's a huge motivator for people in games. And I can see how that, for instance, could be a huge motivator for some of the people that you're talking about.
Yeah, I can definitely see, you know, there are things that jump out, because, you know, quite early on there was the stories piece. Well, you know, generally with the CRM software, the end customer is on a journey, and so you're kind of building that story with that. But then you've also got things, you had the branching choices, and it's like, well, if I chose this, what would happen if I chose this? And like you say, it's not that overt gaming, is it? It's kind of building those elements in that people don't really pick up on it. You know, the people that are involved in the learning experience don't pick up on the gaming, but actually it's working with the human mind to kind of drive them through that journey, and like you've said, you know, motivate them to keep going, so that they do learn everything that they need to learn to be able to do what you want them to do. So
yeah, absolutely. And I'll start sharing that for a minute, but I also kind of had a look at your 7 pillars, and was just thinking of some of the key themes that jumped out at me from that might suit some of those kind of techniques that we just saw there. So for instance, you talked a little bit about in the 7 pillars, the onboarding process, and that's somewhere where I could see unlockable content working really well for people, so they can see that functionality is there, but they're not distracted by being able to click on it and use it just yet. Or definitely signposting of, you know, this is where we want you to go next. You know, you do have all these options, and that's something I see a lot with software. You know, people who design software say, well, we want you to be able to do everything, but actually your early users, you don't want them to be able to do all this stuff, because they're just going to get confused.
yeah,
or, you know, branching choices. Okay, what would you like to create? You know, in a way, if you go back as far as the, you know, the little Microsoft clip guy that used to pop up and say, I see you writing a letter, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, it's easy to make fun of now. It's a good early example of people trying to use this thing.
Definitely showing your age now, Terry.
Yeah, sorry, some people are going to go, what's he talking about?
Yeah, I used to love that guy though. So yeah.
Or if you take stakeholders, you know, you talked about it being really important to draw in stakeholders. So the game idea of a kind of dashboard, maybe you could have one for each of the stakeholders that they're able to customize and talk about what they want from the system or from the learning. Or you talked about task focus being really important rather than system focus. So, you know, it could be, there's this idea of a boss battle, which sounds very, you know, game, but actually if you say, right, instead of the boss being, you know, a huge robot or whatever, the boss is just this challenge, this task that your organization often has to meet, and you need to be able to defeat that boss. But in order to defeat that boss, you need to learn some of these techniques that we're going to be talking about in the next hour or whatever it might So there's lots of these ideas that, you can start to link in with a bit of creative thinking, a bit of brainstorming to what it is you're trying to do with the learner or with the user.
Brilliant. Yeah. And I think one of the key things for me as well is that quite often people do seem to think that it only really applies to online or e-learning, but actually that, these techniques really work in a face-to-face or a virtual live environment as well, don't they? So that's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, face-to-face is actually what I've done far more of over the last 20 years than virtual. I mean, obviously, particularly recently, I've had a lot of involvement with virtual and with creating kind of digital, or being involved in creating digital products. But yeah, all this stuff, because it's about the human motivation, it works wherever that person is potentially.
Brilliant. Thanks, Terry. So that's been really, really useful, really interesting. So if people want to learn more about you and about gamification, how could they get in touch with you?
So, I mean, I'd be really happy for people to look me up on LinkedIn and connect. So just Terry Pearce on LinkedIn. You can also have a look at my website, untoldplay.com, and there's a sign-up box there for my newsletter, which is all kinds of useful tips and ideas about gamification and games within learning. So yeah, that'll probably be the two best ways.
Brilliant. And I'll make sure that I put the links in the comments of the video. So thank you very much for your time, Terry, and have a great day.
No worries. Great to speak to you, Susanna.